Here's what happened. Sean, it seems that when I look on Instagram every few weeks, you're traveling to a new place and you're running to the Avicii song. So, what is it that you do? And then, what is a typical workday schedule like for you? Talk me through that.
Yeah, thanks, RD. Well, where I'm running to all these places is about 6 years ago, we started a sports entertainment business agency called Elevate, and we are like a turbo boost button for teams, league owners, brands, sports properties, as they navigate their way through sports business and face a lot of challenges on the revenue side, fan experience side, marketing, sales side. So, having said that, our agency's grown in the last 6 years, and I look after our international business. So it does keep me on the road, literally week by week, day by day. So day to day is a lot of planes, trains, and automobiles, meeting with clients, meeting with prospects, talking through how we can hopefully be a great partner and what that health and fitness are important to me. So what it also means is I get to the biggest blessing in the world, which is I get to experience new cultures and places. And my chosen way of doing that is by running. I find that when I run and I'm in a new place, I get to see sights of cities and countries that I've never seen before. That allows me to spend some time with myself and really get to take in what these countries have. And like Avicii says, hopefully I can stay this young.
Yeah. Yo, what comes up for you when you go for that run in a new place? Like what are the feelings that start to bubble up as you're checking it out for the city that you're in? Like, talk me through that experience.
Well, the first thing is, since I moved to London a few years ago, I try to first remember if I should be looking right or left when I'm crossing the street. That's probably the number one thing that's coming through my head. No, I for me it's about everything. I like observing the sights and sounds. I usually I have AirPods in. I don't always have music in, depending on where I'm at. I love seeing the culture, the people, the buildings, the wildlife, sometimes the trees and the plants. I love the different terrain. So running on streets and gravel, I like noticing how sidewalks are different in certain countries or shoulders, textures. So for me, it's about this is a way where you can actually um, take something in that you wouldn't normally see because otherwise you're in a hotel, you go to a boardroom, you go to a sporting event, and then that's all you see. But for me, it's about how do you actually take in a whole environment and be one with it. So that's what I think about on the runs. And then hopefully I think about nothing and let my mind wander.
Yeah. Well, and going from that now, what are your non-negotiables? Especially like getting into travel, like going to different new places. What become non-negotiables for you for your better habits?
Yeah, there's a few. So a good friend of mine named Colin O'Brady, we were at an F1 event and he was staying, we were sharing a hotel room and it's like a good old school sleepover, with those things we used to have as kids. And we were just wrapping up, about to go to bed, and he put in earplugs and he was like had an eye mask in his Kindle, and I was like, "Hey, brother, like I don't snore, like it's all good." And he's like, "No, man, this is my routine. I've done this because some of your audience may know Colin O'Brady. He's a big adventurer and multi-time world record holder. So he's slept in many places that are not a nice hotel room, and he taught me a lot about sleeping actually. So my non-negotiables now is I take my Kindle, so I'll read right before bed. I sleep with an eye mask. I now sleep with an eye mask at home, and that's been game changing, especially having young kids. I have certain nutrition and hydration I take. I take my morning greens powder. I take my daily vitamins, plant based. So I have my vegan vitamin. Take my ginkgo. I have my Pro Mix protein. So I have a certain regimen I stay with on the sort of the health side and diet side. I would say the eye patch, the Kindle, and then finally my running shoes so I can make sure I stay active. I whenever I'm on the road, every single day I'm doing something active. Not every day is a hard workout in the gym or a run. It could be stretching. And then of course I always find a sauna and or cold plunge where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because of course, like the drive, like you and I vibe on that drive, and I think back to where it comes for me of wanting to really push to see what I'm capable of as a human being, and also early on it was to like show people what's up of hey, I'm capable of more. what do I not know about you that would explain where your drive comes from?
Yeah, I'd say a majority of it comes from my father. My dad's been a leading cancer researcher in the world for the last 25 years. And one thing I always remember is every time he didn't have a ton of hobbies. He was always either working or spending time with us. And he was, of course, there for all throughout my childhood with for all my events and activities and games. And one thing I've noticed with him is I would wonder every Saturday morning I'd wake up and he'd be up early and he'd already be on the computer doing some computer programming, or he'd be sitting on the couch reading. And he never just sort of relaxed or did. I mean, maybe that is relaxing to him, but he never sort of, I guess, typical what you or I may do, but never just sit on the couch and watch a sports game. Or he was always doing something to better himself and learn. And I never thought anything of it. I was just like, oh, he's always up doing it. He's always up doing it. And as I've gotten older, I realized, I guess, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, where it's like if you just observe and you're around this discipline and these behaviors day after day, year after year, hour after hour, it rubs off on you. And for me, it's I just don't have uh, any thoughts about slowing down or stopping until we get to where the top is. And for people like you and for anyone ambitious, like the top never comes, right? Like you get to what you think the top of a mountain is. And I know you've got ambitious goals with what you've been doing with Burnout and everything from the podcast. And as you know, like once you hit that top of the mountain, that's going to feel just like any other day, and there'll be a new top of the mountain. And I think it's very inspiring and ambitious, and obviously what you're doing. And that's what I do. It's day by day, it's minute by minute, and I try to execute the fundamentals and stay disciplined, and that drive has pushed me from there.
Well, and as you said that too, I just popped back in. My dad was similar of like he would wake up early before I got up, be working, then late at night as I'm going to bed, he's working. And so it's interesting, like you saying that, I'm like, oh shit, yeah. Like I'm in a similar I had a similar experience with my dad. What would you say to someone that doesn't have someone in their immediate environment that can be that role model? I think about that with especially thinking of men. It's and like those that are rising up to be men. It can be hard to find role models if they don't have it in their immediate environment. So like, what would you say to someone that's trying to connect to their drive and be able to push themselves further?
Yeah, first of all, I am very grateful that I had two loving parents, and parents that were really invested in my education and health and career. So I am very grateful for that. To me, it's about what's important to you and what do you wake up loving. One of my old bosses told me this. He was at the bar with this older gentleman, and they were chatting, and the old guy said to him, "Hey, well, why are you taking out your phone?" And he was holding it. My old boss was taking, his name Scott O'Neill, was taking like this, and he's like, "Well, you just told me you're going to tell me the secret to life, so I want to have this on video." So this guy told him he had the secret to life, and what he said was the secret to life is that when you wake up in the morning and put your 2 feet on the floor, um, you are so excited for what you have at work or your calling that you spring out of bed. You put your feet on and you bounce out of bed. And when that time for shutting down happens in the proverbial office or in the office at 5:01 or 7:01 or 9:01, whatever time it is, you put your 2 feet on the floor and you're so excited to sprint home because what you have at home is so awesome, whether it's your partner, your kids, your friends, your social circle, your activities. And that to me has really stuck out. So to me, RD, it's about finding what is it something that you're passionate about and that you believe you can excel in if you put your time into it. And then finding a mentor or people to look up to or articles to read or whatever it is on those things. I'm a big fan of also finding people that inspire you. So for you and I, we might get inspired by something similar, the rah and people that are ambitious and moving forward. Some people might get inspired by someone who shows a great amount of tranquility or that's done some great thing in research. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is, but finding something that gets I call it the first day of school feeling. I try to chase that every day. I think if you get that first day of school feeling where your blood pressure rises a bit, your stomach feels weird, that means you're either having a tough conversation and pushing things forward, or you're chasing something that's worthy of chasing. So my advice would be to first identify something you're passionate about and then seek it out in the way you want it. Some people don't want any interaction. Some people want to have a one-on-one with that type of person. Some people may just want to read about it, but I think that's what I'd start, and then reach out to people, because what I'd say is everyone's been in the shoes we've been in. I've been a student. I've been jobless. I've been a kid trying to figure out what's his first step in the career. So I find that 99% of people really do want to help, as long as you can get in front of the right people, which I think most people struggle with.
Well, and speaking of that too, that just popped up, how do you communicate to someone that you don't know yet? Like, to send out a message like that. I think of that when I first was starting to do it, there was like this intense like fear of a burden. I'm going to be a burden. I'm going to be like, this person's going to think I'm an asshole for like reaching out and wasting their time. So what would be the best way that you've noticed for you to be able to send a message to someone you're looking up to want to connect with?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll tell you a story. When I grew up in Canada, and my parents are both from India, and my dad's a doctor, my brother's a doctor. He got a job doing cancer research in Philadelphia in the middle of my high school. I found my way to Penn State University for undergrad, and I was a finance major in college. And like any good senior, on Friday afternoons, I had Fridays off. So I was sitting around on a Friday in college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to go into medicine like my brother and dad, and I didn't really want to go to Wall Street at the time. Like, I wasn't waking up reading the Wall Street Journal at the time. And I went to NHL.com, and I saw, which is the hockey site, and I saw the Phoenix Coyotes were hiring. And it said part full-time sales job. And I was like, man, what the heck is this? Like, part full-time sales. I want to figure out what this is. But I'm like, my parents will kill me if I take a part-time job after graduating college. But at the time, Wayne Gretzky was the head coach of the Phoenix Coyotes. So I probably don't have to tell you or anyone listening what Wayne Gretzky means to a Canadian kid. So I called in the number and I said, hey, I'm looking for the director of sales that's hiring this job. And the lady, Joanne, she transfers me to this guy's desk. He answers the phone. He's like, hey, you sound like a good kid. Asked me some questions about my resume. He's like, send me your resume and call me Monday at 5 and I'll interview you. So I said, okay, great. So Monday at 5 comes around. This is obviously well before Zoom. They say, dress like the way you want to present yourself. So I was wearing like a nice button-down shirt and khakis. I'm sitting up at the conference room in Penn State. I called him at 5 p.m., didn't answer. That's weird. I called him 10 minutes later, didn't answer. Called him the next day, didn't answer. Called him the next day, didn't answer. Emailed him the next day, didn't answer. Called him the next day, didn't answer. Emailed him the next day, didn't answer. For 45 days straight, I called him twice a day. I emailed him 9 times. And on the 10th time, I said, hey, I'm a young kid trying to get my start in sports. You were so excited to talk to me. What happened? Didn't hear anything. And about 3 days later, on Friday afternoon, I was sitting there in my room and I got a call from the Phoenix number. And it was this guy. And he answered. He says, hey, Shawn, I wanted to let you know that I think you've earned your start here. So you graduate on May 22nd. And on June 1st, I want you to come work in sales for the Phoenix Coyotes. So why I tell that story is I learned a lot about persistence and passion in that moment, because I was just thinking innocently as a college kid. The guy said he wanted to talk to me, and he said he wanted to talk to me. He was interested. So like, why hasn't he said no? I mean, but I noticed a lot of times people would probably stop after the first or second day or the third day. Oh man, probably doesn't like me. Why he's not answering me? But for me, I wasn't some sales guru. I was just thinking, like, he said he wanted to talk to me and he didn't answer me. So I just kept calling until I got an answer, and the answer happened to be yes. And what I didn't realize now is all those steps, being persistent, being passionate, being pleasant, following up, are all things you need to do in a business career. And, it ended up being almost like a test. So if you ask me, I think the biggest thing people miss on is that how many times have you been asked to do something or agreed to do something? I'll donate to your charity. I'll call you tonight. And you had the best intentions, but even to your best friends or family, you forgot to do something. I mean, how many times does that happen to you? Once a week, once a month. I mean, happens to me all the time. So then I realized, like, very early on in my career, that there's so many instances. And in fact, when I got in his position 3 years later, same thing happened to me. I'd miss 20, 30 calls at my desk because honestly, when would I ever check my missed calls on a desk phone? When I manage 20 people, the only time someone's leaving a message for me is to say that one of my employees did something wrong or they're trying to sell me something. So I realized that out of those 90 calls, maybe he didn't even see many of them. And then I realized in an email, if he's getting 100 emails, he might delete all of them. And I mean, heck, voicemail, most people won't even know what voicemail is now, but like voicemail, why was he even listening to the voicemail? So if I think about, for me, it was a lot of reach outs, but maybe only 12 of them got to him. So I think the first step to answer your original question through that is that you have to try and get in front of people. Like you have to just go for it, have something, show up at their door, write them a handwritten note, send them a LinkedIn, connect with them, find something unique about them, but find a way to differentiate yourself and just go for it. Because what's the worst that can happen? Most people overinflate the worst thing that can happen. You reach out to 10 mentors and 9 of them tell you to go F off and one of them finally answers you. What's the worst that happens? 9 people know your name and they just say, yeah, I don't have time for this kid. Or, hey, I don't want to talk to you. Or, you know what? I appreciate your story, but it's not for me, but talk to my brother. So I just think about what's the actual worst case that could happen. And I would be passionate and go for it.
Yeah. Well, did it ever close the loop? Did he ever say, was it a test or not?
We talked about it to this day because the fast forward of that is 6 years ago, I started the agency with him. So yeah, he says, one day he'll say it was a test. The other day he'll say it was busy. So yeah, it's pretty funny.
That's so funny. But it makes so much sense. Like that makes so much sense for what you say, for the persistency, just being able to realize, hey, I want to talk to this person. This person seemed interested and like was excited, and just continuing to push through like that. Such a powerful lesson in that. And it goes into like what I talk about, which is like the small wins lead to the big wins. So remember those small wins. For you, what has been like some crucial small wins that you've had to come back to that have helped you when you've had those bigger wins in your life?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of fundamentals. I think that there is no secret sauce to life. I mean, I do some ultra running on the side, so to think about running 100 miles is pretty daunting. Running a marathon is pretty daunting, but to run 25 miles, you have to run 20, and to run 20, you have to run 15, and to run 10, you have to run 5, and to run 5, you have to run 1, and to run 1, you have to put your shoes on to go out the door. So I am a big believer in the fundamentals, and really just that, like, there's this great book called The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Okay. So he's a Hall of Fame football coach for the San Francisco 49ers, and he writes a book, and in this book, he calls it his standard of performance. And the premise of the book is, with his football club, is that if you do things right on a minute by minute basis, then you do things right on an hour by hour basis, and hours turn to days, days turn to months, months turn to years, and then you and your organization can achieve greatness. And it's nothing astronomical that you're doing right on a minute by minute basis. But if you're a salesperson, are you actually asking for referral on every call? If you're a runner, are you running if you're supposed to run 5 times a week, are you running 5 times a week? If you're saying you're trying to change your diet and eat healthy, are you grabbing for the snacks? Or are you actually eating your 3 square meals a day? If you say you want to weigh in every day to find your weight progress, are you weighing in every day or every other day? And no one's perfect, but what I've realized is it's the fundamentals that take you the furthest. And because there is no secret sauce, that's the only thing I know I can relate to. Because I can't relate to running, even though I do it, I can't relate to running 100 miles right now, or 1,000 miles or 500 miles. I can't relate to thinking about what's 5 years from now. And I don't think about 5 years from now. Of course, I'm vigilant with opportunities and I try to grow, but I know I can control what's in the now. So I do it on so many bases, whether it's just even getting a response from a prospect after an email. That's a small win to me. I'm checking off the list. If it's weighing myself every day, and let's say I've had a bad week, but I can scroll back in the app and see I was actually 5 pounds down from my heaviest, then that's a small win. So I'm a big fan of that, because I really don't think that things happen just by happenstance or by some Hail Mary. I do think it's about the fundamentals. So I'm a big fan of that concept that you preach.
Yeah. Well, where do that fundamentals come from? I'm trying to think, was that like a conversation that happened? Has that always just been with you? Because I think of shortcuts like that where people can get stuck in the trap where you have the down day, you're feeling like shit, and then you see something that feels like a shortcut, and all of a sudden you get drawn to be like, oh, is there another way to go about this rather than just putting in the reps every day? So yeah, where does that come from for you? Was that combo or was that something that always been with you?
I think it goes back to like parents and people around and coaches and just watching. You know, I I think that, and also just by the practice and trying it, right? Like sales is it's an interesting thing. When I started in sales, you'd make 100 calls to hopefully get on the phone with 20 people to hopefully get 10 chances for an appointment. And if you said 2 appointments in a day, that was great. So can you imagine if I played in the NBA and I said I made 2 out of 100 free throws? I mean, could you imagine how bad that is? Or even if I had two at bats in the major leagues, I got a hit. Can you imagine how poor that would be? But yet, sales is one of those things that if you get 2 out of 100, that's good. 4 out of 100 is great. 6 out of 100 is amazing, and 8 out of 100, I mean, you're Hall of Fame level here, right? So, for me, I would say it's a lot about just observing when I grew up and how things have gotten better for me as I put in the reps, and then to realize that there are no shortcuts. I think mentally understanding that there are no shortcuts is a big thing, and just watching people, like some of the people I admire the most, whether it's a Kobe Bryant or even like my favorite rapper Lil Wayne. I mean, like the guy just he not only does he have the greatest bars ever, but it's also just like seeing his I mean, he says repetition's the father of learning, and you see all the mixtapes, all the times in the studio, his interviews. I mean, when you're surrounded by that and see what that constant work does, and then you put it in practice, it's really powerful. But I was really lucky. I mean, like I said, I think that if when you're around it day to day, I mean, I was always drilled about the importance of getting good grades in school, and like I'm not the naturally smartest person, but I have great habits. So if you study long enough and you put the time in, like you can find a way to understand the system. And I think that understanding that from a young age, or realizing that when you play a sport and you do a lot of conditioning and all of a sudden you don't get as tired in a game, like that registers in your brain, whether you think about it or not. So it's not like one thing. I would say, I think for me, it's been a lot through learning through experiences and just being observant and catching it from what's around me and who's around me.
Yeah. When thinking back into then burnout for you, like how I explain it on the show is that it's a spectrum every day. Where on one end of the spectrum, you make burnout extinct. On the other end, you've hit burnout. And every day you decide where you're at on this. And it's not like once you've made burnout extinct, it's forever. It's a
Yeah.
constant everyday process. So for you, and I explain it as like a balloon filling up with air. Like the body can handle stresses, the overwhelm, the anxiety, but then there's a certain point where it's going to pop, and that's hitting burnout, where you either lose a job, you have to quit the job, or if it's a business, you close down the business, try to sell it. So for you, what have been like personal experiences where you start to notice or these signals that you're moving towards burnout, and like how do you catch yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first one is the good old feeling of the Sunday scaries. I think most people know about that, but it's that notion that on a Sunday night you sort of get this like world is ending feeling, like, oh my God, am I doing the right thing at work? I've got so much to do. A lot of times it happens when people aren't drinking the night before, but it also happens when you're not drinking. So I noticed when I get that scary feeling, so that mental overwhelm, that's one of my first cues for burnout in my case. Other thing is psychologically. I mean, your body knows, like it's very hard to lose weight when you have high cortisol levels and you're stressed. So, for example, if you're actually eating right and exercising, but all of a sudden you're not seeing results in your split times or your workouts or the weigh scale, that's another big cue. Even little things like people get acne when they're stressed, or just like your body changes, like your body is trying to regulate and get you back to the homeostasis. So those are some of the things for me. I am a big believer. One of my favorite books, and a friend of mine is a guy named Jay Shetty, and it says How to Think Like a Monk. He's written this book, and he talks about how monks spend the first part of the days until noon doing things only for themselves. So, for example, they wake up and they do their prayer. They then do community service. They get in whatever workout and physical activity and mental activity so that by noon, they're ready to give the whole world, give themselves to the whole world. So they've handled themselves and they give themselves to the whole world. I'm lucky that I make fitness and health a priority. So every day when I'm at home, I jump in my cold plunge. It's a great honorable way to start the day and gets you, grounded pretty quickly. It's very hard to think about anything else, no matter how many times you've sat in a cold plunge when you get in there. I always make time for a workout or stretching. And in my case, I just wake up earlier. If I have to take the kids somewhere at 7 a.m., I just wake up earlier so I get it in. So I think for me, a big thing is doing those non-negotiables so that no matter what stress happens to me during the day, no matter how bad work is, if I get fired or the client says no, that I've handled myself, because I don't think I could be the best father, husband, coworker, friend, podcast guest if I don't take care of myself. So I'm very selfish with my time in that way. And that's purely for selfish reasons, so I can give my world to everyone else.
For someone that's like, I don't even know where to start when it comes to getting into those activities for myself and creating that time for themselves. Like, what would you say to someone that's like, how do I even get started with this thing?
Yeah, I would start with like, just block off 20 minutes a day. I mean, and if 20 minutes is too long, do 10 minutes a day. And I think you can go down so many different routes here. For me, I love the idea of just go for a walk, go for 10-minute walk, go for 20-minute walk, like move, get your blood flowing a bit, see where your mind wanders. You could journal for 5 minutes of those 20 minutes. You could do push-ups. I mean, if you're asking me what I would tell everyone to do, I think building muscle and staying in good fitness is really important. So I would say for 10 minutes, do some push-ups, sit-ups, and air squats, and then go for 10 minutes for a little walk, jog outside. And that should be enough that once you get back from that, if you do that for a week and you don't do anything, you're gonna be like, holy cow, I'm either sore or I'm feeling good. But I think that like, it's obviously a very custom thing, but I would spend 20 minutes a day, ideally in the morning, on yourself. Maybe it's reading a book you never get to read because you're too busy. Maybe it's calling a friend. Maybe it's the workout. I do something pretty interesting every morning. I wake up and I scroll as far down on my phone as I can, as much as I feel like, and I see who's on there, and I text 2 random people, and I say, "Hey, thinking about you now. I looked at this old text. I saw this picture." And, a lot of people, they're really excited to get the message. Like, oh man, that's so nice. Like, I haven't talked to you in a while. I can't believe we haven't caught up. But for me, it's actually even so much more rewarding too, to get to connect back with someone. So I think there's so many different strategies of how I would connect back with myself based on where you're at. I personally like getting the blood going, but I'd start with 20 minutes. I mean, that no one, even the busiest CEO in the world, even Elon Musk, even, you name the person, the president of the United States, can devote 20 minutes to themselves.
Powerful. Yeah. And to think back to with friends, how, and connections, like how important is having other people there to support you in your own journey of life? Because there's a study that I talked about it, or a survey that happened where it was like, I think if I can get it right, it was like 1990s, 3% of Americans said that they had 0 close friends. And then recently of 2021, it was 12% that said they had no close friends. And so there's this loneliness epidemic that's out there.
Yeah.
So how important is that to have people, what feels like, on your team?
Yeah. To me, it's the most paramount thing in the world. I mean, I think that having a team around you of your network of family or friends or people that can champion you, be there for you, give you real talk when you need it, it's so important. I mean, to have other people in the fight with you, because it's not always pretty and things don't go well, but it's so important to have people there. And look, some people want to have 3 best friends and some people want 300. I happen to be the type of person who wants, I think Simon Sinek does a good thing on this, but it's like, for me, like my jar starts empty, and every time I have an interaction with someone, it's like filling up a marble in my jar. And at the end of the day, I want to have a full jar. Whereas my wife's the opposite. She's got 5 marbles in her jar, And every interaction she has with someone, that's one marble out of the jar. So for her, social interaction and like being around people, she doesn't get energized by that like I do. So I do think it matters on who you are. But in either case, both people need a team, people, friends, an outlet, someone who can have that discussion. So I think it's really important to have, I believe it's really important. I've never seen anyone get to the top of what they want to get to alone. And the top doesn't mean by results or career. It just means like to be the best person you can be. I've never seen anyone do it alone. I've always seen someone have an accountability partner or a friend or someone to hold them accountable and keep them honest or teach them something, learn something. So to me, that's almost the most important piece.
Yeah. And what would be to expand on it more, like specific ways to start if someone's like, I have no friends, but I want friends, to how to start that process of connecting?
Yeah, I would say one, by stepping out of your comfort zone. So if you're at a place where you're not in a place you want to be socially, it's like, okay, then let's get some little wins. So maybe let's go to the coffee shop and order a drink and sit at the couch and wait till someone comes and sits by. Maybe you love books, you can go to the library, you love playing sports, go to the park and go to the basketball court. I go back to like leaning into something you're passionate about. So that's not uncomfortable because you love doing it. Maybe like bird watching, go to the park and watch birds and sit on the bench. So I'd say first start with something you're passionate about. And then two, I genuinely believe that 99.8% of the world is very nice. They're generous. They're kind. They're warm. They're understanding. They're empathetic, and they want to help. If someone was having any type of issue, they'd want to help. So I think just starting up and striking a conversation. I mean, I know I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I wouldn't have. If I met my wife, I wouldn't have had this career or job if I didn't just go for it and try and be willing to fail. And you know what? Maybe that guy never would have called me back 45 days later, and I'd be sitting somewhere on Wall Street, or maybe I'd be doing something else. But if you don't try, you're never going to get. And I go back to, if you are someone that doesn't have the strongest social circle, well, look, then you really got nothing to lose, because if 10 people say no to you, then it doesn't matter, because you're not in a place you want to be. And you know what? I can promise you on that 39th or 40th or 50th or 60th or 70th or maybe even 100th time, someone's going to be really receptive, and that could be your new friend for life or your life partner. And to me, that's invaluable. I mean, that could be the difference between you spending another 10 years on the planet or 100 years happy,
Well, it goes back to, for what I've shared, it's like one rep away. It's just you're one rep away, go into that process and keep going. Well, and bringing that into then endurance events, how important was that with having friends in the endurance event space? Specifically, I think if you're a 100-miler around Lake Como, like what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was the first. I'd done a few events before this, but this was the first event where it was self-curated. So there was no finish line theatrics. There was no one videoing it. I mean, I happened to go with a few friends, so we did get some content, but it wasn't a sanctioned race like we'd all know a marathon. And previously I'd been doing things where there was a lot of motivation and it was easy to get up. Like, you and I have done a similar event. You get to this 29029 and you get there, and it's hard not to be inspired by 300 people around you, and you do something together. Or anyone who's went to a marathon, like if you start in New York or Boston, I mean, you're going to finish that bad boy because there's such good energy. So this was one of the first events I did where there was no fanfare, there was no camera. It was me and two people. It was three people. I had a guy at home that helped me on some flow and mindset coaching. And then I had two people for the race. So this 2-person team was basically I started on the southern end of Lake Como in Italy, just north of Milan. And I ran around like the left side, west side of the lake, all the way to the north, to the east, down to the south and back. And it was about 101 mile loop. And because it was self-curated, we rented an SUV, and every 6 miles, approximately, they'd stop ahead with the food and the water so I could get refueled. What I learned in that moment is that, man, you wouldn't believe how excited I was every 6 miles to see those two people. Like, what a smile it put on my face when I saw the SUV and I saw those two guys. It was two people. Like, it was literally two people. The night before, they helped make the food, and I happened to be taken around by a guy named Will Goodge, who's one of the world's best ultra runners. So he's done this before. So he knew that, yeah, you know what, pasta and potatoes and this type of sweet you may want. So every 6 miles, I was greeted by them, and they knew exactly what to give me from a food and a water perspective. And for someone like me who hadn't run 100 miles before, that's important, right? Because I didn't know the playbook and I'd never done anything like that. The morale that you got, the real talk, the novelty of it, it was just so helpful. And to me, that was actually the biggest takeaway I had. It didn't have anything to do with what I felt, you know, oh man, how many more limits could I push? I really learned the power of having a strong support system. So in that case, it was Will Goodge and one of my coworkers, Fergus, and then a mindset coach, Hassan Khan. And to me, like without those three people, and then of course my trainer, I don't know where I'd be. I certainly wouldn't have finished that race. So it was very inspiring for me to see what the power of a group of people could do. And in this case, it was literally two people live with me. And I think that's sometimes what people underestimate. It's like team is a generous word. It was three of us. And that just knowing someone's in your corner and believing in you, it's like, I didn't want to let them down. Like it's inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. They were there to support me no matter what the outcome of the race was. But when those two people spent their time and their efforts to come out there and be around, like that's a very uplifting place to be. And you don't want to disappoint. And that carried me through a lot of this.
Yeah, well, it's so like what comes up with me with that too is that there can be like I notice that where people feels like they're checking out from life. And it's interesting to try to figure out why that is for why people check out. And what would be your take on that of why you feel people are checking out of life?
Well, I think that another thing that the perspective that I've been lucky, my parents are both from India, so I've got to go to India a number of times every 3 years or so. I was going as a kid, and I got a chance to see what the other side of the world looks like. So I remember at my grandparents' house for 2 trips in a row, there was one mom and a kid that would come to my grandmother's house, and they'd be begging for a plate for food, and my grandmother would scoop a plate of rice there. And I'd be like, oh, that's so weird. Like, why do these kids, why does this mom and kid need this plate of rice? And then can you imagine going back to the same house 3 years later and seeing the same mom and kid, a little bit older, still begging at the same points, and they'd go to the well for the water. So I realized very early that it's like not everyone has it like we do. And that even the worst case in North America is like, it pales in comparison to what some other people's struggles are around the world. So I think now extrapolating back to what you said is if you make minimum wage in the US and you live in a modest 1-bedroom studio and it's a struggle to pay your bills, but at the same point you've got a roof over your head, and even if it's not glamorous, you could eat rice and beans and treat yourself to a donut every once in a while. I think people get comfortable, and there's not a real threat of what the worst case is. And going back to what the worst case is like for probably at least 80% of people listening to this, if you are fortunate enough to listen to a podcast, right? So for that 80, probably maybe 100% of those listeners, but let's say 80% of these people that anyone that will listen to this conversation, it's like your worst case is not that bad. You can move back in with your parents. You've got a brother, a sister, a loved one, a cousin, a friend from elementary school, someone on Facebook you could reach out to. You can couch surf. So my hunch is that when you don't feel the pressure, you don't have that pressure, that perhaps it's easier to coast and go from there. Because, it is hard. Like sometimes it's hard to relate to say, like people say, oh man, you run 100 miles. I could never do that. I can't relate. I'm thinking, well, I can't relate to what you're saying. It's an equal unrelatability in terms of that. So I do have trouble sometimes thinking like, why don't we have that drive to be better? Why don't we have that drive to continuously improve? And like, what's in it to keep pushing? But that would be maybe my guess on it.
Yeah, I resonate with you on how it is like one of those moments where you cannot, like, it's hard to relate. It's that two-way street there. And it's interesting because then that comes back to what I think of, where it's realizing we are all human beings. Like, we all
Mm-hmm.
have the potential within us and capabilities. You have internal conditions, you have external conditions, but that doesn't have to be in the driver's seat of your life. Like, you have option of jumping into that driver's seat and taking control of your life. And I think that's just such a
Exactly.
powerful distinction of what you're talking about, where we all are human beings.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you laid it out best, and I think it was your first episode of your story, and how you had that monumental moment during COVID, and you moved home and you took agency of the situation, and now look where you're at now. I mean, it's inspiring.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Well, and how, for someone that's like having to face a challenge coming up, or like they see it right in front of, like, they can either do nothing and just continue to live their life of how it is, or they have an opportunity to step in and lean in. Like, what would be those words that you tell that person when they're getting ready to face that challenge?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I would think of it this way. I like to think of these challenges, and I just think about, it's like, anytime I've done anything hard, advertently or inadvertently, even if I didn't want to do something hard, tough job situation, at the gym, or even as a kid playing sports, I just thought about how great it feels on the other side of doing something challenging. And again, whether you like the challenge or not, or you meant to be in the challenge, I mean, even if it's like getting stuck in the epic rainstorm and you're pissed and you're drenched and you're like, what the heck? Why didn't I bring the right clothes? It ends up being the story you tell later. A year later, you're talking about the story of the day you got stuck in the rainstorm, or that time when you're looking for your kid's school and you went to 15 schools in 15 days, and all of a sudden, like, you found the school, but it wasn't for a year of hard work of putting the time in with your family. And then that's the story you tell. So I think about anything great or meaningful that I've ever done, and it's after those challenges. And like our friend Jesse says, it's like, remember tomorrow. Like, how are you going to feel? Imagine how you're going to feel in a day, a week, or a month if you go through both of those outcomes. So for me, if it's like a busy training block, it's like, I know how I'd feel if I don't train tomorrow, and I'd be really annoyed that I couldn't check that off in my app that I did the work I needed to do. I know how I'd be really annoyed if I have to log in my Fitness Pal when I'm tracking my food that I ate that candy bar. So I like try to think about what it's going to feel like on the other side of it. And I'd say if you're one that doesn't, that usually, if the building's burning and you're one to run out and just want to hang out and not really run back in to try to rescue the dog. The other thing is, I just say, just try it. Just try it once on something low consequence, right? Like, let's say you're having trouble taking that big next step at your job. Well, do it on something smaller, try it outside, try it with a friend, and just go for it and see what happens. And hey, if you don't like it, then go back to what you're doing. But I think just putting yourself in that situation, I think most people would be surprised how they react and then how they feel after it.
Yeah. Shawn, I appreciate you. I know epic wisdom that was shared with the audience. I know someone can take something from this and resonate with it. So appreciate you for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm really inspired by what you're doing. You keep it up. And I know you got big things for the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So if people want to learn more about, like, what you're up to, what's going to be the best ways to stay connected?
Yeah, for sure. I think Instagram is the best. I believe I'm Doss the Boss 14. Doss the Boss 14. You can put it in the show notes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll link it.
exactly. Yeah, happy to talk to anyone or reach out. I mean, I think what you're doing, and I believe the what you're teaching everyone, or sharing these stories to try to help people get by, is something really important. And it's if people just listen to a fraction of the things that you're talking about and stories you're sharing, I know it'll make the world a better place. So it's very inspiring.
Appreciate you.